if one pays very close attention to the book of Acts, and at the same time, as someone who has been to seminary and maybe has even studied church growth principles and maybe has focused on missions, then I think very early on, one notices a discrepancy between church growth principles that sometimes or very often come out of a business background, strategizing how one gets from A to B, or how the consumer, so to speak, either Christians or simply anyone who comes to church or who is to be reached with the gospel, how they determine what we do when we do church. It's a terrible phrase, I think, to do church. And in the book of Acts, one realizes pretty quickly that these concerns were not really uppermost in the minds of the apostles. They told the story of Jesus. They talked about Jesus' death on the cross. Peter does so in Jerusalem, where Jesus had been crucified, and where, Jesus' enemies were still around, and where the apostles were arrested. And yet repeatedly, Peter talks about Jesus having died on the cross, because they did believe and they did preach that being a member of God's messianic people and to have forgiveness of sins is tied to believing in Jesus, who not only lived and said, love your enemies, but who died on the cross and then rose from the dead. That accepting God's revelation in this story of Jesus, this is what the gospel is. And so this is, I think, what young pastors and older pastors as well learn and should learn from the book of Acts, that what drives real, authentic church growth is a commitment to the gospel, and that the gospel is about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. So it's not, at the end of the day, techniques of church planting or techniques of witnessing, although we can learn from all kinds of areas and see how we can improve our own pastoral ministry and evangelistic and missionary ministry. But the heart of the gospel is always Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And then obviously the Holy Spirit is emphasized, as is the risen Jesus still being active in the missionary work of the early church. And so if we realize that and if we acknowledge that, then we have the courage even to go into very difficult contexts like the Muslim world, where you can't really strategize with what the consumer likes, because we know they don't like Christians since a long time, especially in the current political situation. They may not like Westerners, period. But we realize in the book of Acts that it is the risen Christ himself, it is God himself, it is the Holy Spirit who leads people to believe in the gospel. It's not our technique, it's not anything at the end of the day that we do apart from faithfully preaching the gospel. And that, I think, if we learn that as pastors and if we implement that, then we are sort of independent to a certain degree from people that we witness to, not independent in terms of that we don't love them and that we do everything, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, becoming a Jew to Jews and a Greek to Greeks, but that we are not dependent on our success, if we define success in terms of figures and numbers, which is an American hang-up that we all have in this country, that we are so focused on numbers and figures and we measure church growth in these terms. So the early church, they focused on Jesus, they believed in God, they relied on the Holy Spirit, and I believe if the church recaptures that, and in this sense returns to an authentic proclamation of the gospel, then whatever happens, at least we know we are doing the